Welcome everybody to Leadership at the Edge, this conversation for April. Today, we're joined by Tim Duggan, and I'm really excited to get into this conversation. For those of you that don't know Tim, he's a journalist, author of Work Backwards, a leading voice on the future of work. And Tim, I'm really curious to see where we can go with the very broad umbrella that we've cast ourselves. We've got lots of room to move. I've had a lot of messages from leaders who are curious about this space and really keen to hear something perhaps a little bit more grounded than the conceptual esoteric lens that we often hear. And I know you've got lots of ideas and lots of experience to potentially bring to that. It feels like collectively and individually, we are in a moment where we're rethinking our relationship with work, what it means, how we do it well, what we're willing to give to work, and what we want back in return. So we'll unpack some of that today. Yeah. For everyone listening, my invitation is really simple. I would love it if you could stay curious. Notice what resonates, what challenges you, maybe how what we talk through might apply to your world, your team, your leadership. Curiosity wins every time. Now, Tim, let me start here. I've got a question to throw you, and feel free to take this wherever you think is most useful. When have you found yourself up against the edge in your own leadership? What did that look like? How did you navigate it?
What a great first question, because it really has me thinking about leadership, about figuring out how to become a leader, which I think is just an ongoing process. Most of us are thrown into it in the deep end, and all of a sudden you have someone underneath you looking up saying, what do I do? And you need to try and figure that out as you go. And that happened to me as my co-founders and I built a media company over the last 15 years, which I then exited and left in 2020, so 6 years ago. But that process of building that company, and we had about 65 staff when we were at our peak, and a lot of hard work, a lot of mistakes, a lot of ups and downs. That for me was where my leadership and ability to figure out leadership was forged. And we were up against the edge most days, I would say. It was a digital media company, and we were fighting all these massive audience shifts, as well as shifts internally as a business. We kind of grew up, my co-founders and I had a lot of good times, some really hard times. But I do remember, and it's interesting that you asked the question around when I last felt or had a big moment that I felt right at my edge. And it was, I've just been writing for the last few years a book on conflict in the workplace, particularly a book on tensions and kind of when you really feel the heat in a workplace. And we had a really big moment several years ago, many years ago, when we discovered that we were massively in debt as a company and didn't actually realize it until it was almost too late. And this was a moment when a co-founder, myself, and our chair were knocked sideways by almost $1 million in debt. We had to find in a few weeks, or the whole company was going to go into administration. And that to me was so hard to deal with personally, professionally. And we also had to basically hide it from the rest of our staff so that they didn't know what was going on. And that was a really difficult time that I often think about, because I also realized that the line between success and failure is so thin.
So thin. And also, you've survived the hardest day, right?
100%. Yeah, we did survive. Yeah. So a spoiler was we were able to beg, borrow, and steal money from anyone who would listen to us. And we found the money within 2 weeks and didn't go into administration, and continued building a really successful business. Yeah. But it was, I think, those really, really hard moments when everything around you starts falling apart and you start having to be... I don't love the idea of hiding things from too many people, particularly staff, particularly when at the time we were working in glass-walled offices, literally glass-walled offices, and people could look in and see the look at our faces. But there are moments when you have to do that. And leadership, I think, is about having judgment calls around how much to share and what you share with people.
It sounds like a very challenging, defining time building such a successful business and going through highs and lows. And part of what I hear and what you're sharing is the higher the highs, the lower the lows, I guess. I've heard many people express that, and I can certainly see that in my career trajectory and in many of the clients that I work with as well. And building our tolerance for that, I think, can be really important. So you built this business, you've now built a second, third career, another pillar to your work, and I can imagine your work identity in that as well. How did it feel to you as you were navigating walking away from or closing a chapter on building that business, exiting and crafting something new? I think it's that path from point A to point B that unsettles people, and not knowing what that looks like or how to get there that keeps us in mediocre, keeps us in fine, keeps us in meh.
Yeah, identity is one of those fascinating topics that all of us have a work identity that we carefully build and construct around ourselves. And then it can be taken away in a redundancy, it can be taken away in sickness, it can be taken away in, often of your own choice because you decide to leave a job. And my identity for years, I was Tim from Junkee. I often joke that people thought that was my surname because it was this like exotic name and I used to use it so often. And then when I left there in 2020, so almost 6.5 years ago now, I fell into, I didn't realize how hard it was going to be to not have my identity tied up with my job. I'd kind of built this business, built my friendship groups, my work groups, everything around this business. And it threw me more than I thought it was going to. So my husband and I jumped into a camper van. We drove as far as we could, which was during COVID. So it was the New South Wales border. And then we continued driving for, it was meant to be 6 weeks, and we just kept on driving for about 6 months. We just drove around the country. And that is where I started to shed some of the identity. So it was a real conscious how can I forget one, try to kind of replace one side with something else. And then I really spent some time trying to reconnect with what it was for me that I loved before I got caught up in the whirlwind of running a business. And for me, that was writing. It was collating my thoughts into words. It was sharing things with people. It was teaching people. All these things I really loved doing when I was a music journalist in my early 20s. And then I reconnected with that. And I wrote my first book called Cult Status, which was all about how to build a really strong community around your business. And that was quite successful, allowed me to write more books. And now every few years, I dive deep into a big, meaty, knotty, complicated topic that most of us don't get the chance to spend a lot of time really unpacking. And I try and simplify things. And every few years I come out around a topic that hopefully helps people, helps leaders, helps workers kind of understand their place in the world, and particularly this wild new world of work that we're all trying to figure out at the same time, including how LinkedIn Lives work.
Including how I think that there's something really powerful in this recognition that if we wrap everything about our identity and ourselves into one pillar, and sure, we might have an identity as a partner or a son or a daughter or a mother or whatever. But even in our vocational space, if we have this one single pillar, it's like a stool with one leg. And if you take that leg away, then yes, of course, we're going to be very unstable. We're going to find it really hard to replace that. Whereas if we look at a stool that has, like, chairs have 4 legs for a reason, right? Maybe you've got a 3-legged stool. If we've got these different identity pillars, then if one shakes, we can lean into the others while we're wayfinding and rebuilding this other one. When you look back at the time building Junkee, in hindsight, do you see a reality where you created a very singular identity and perhaps there was an opportunity to diversify? Or was there really just the one label?
Yeah, I think
at
I
that
I
time?
actually think that having my identity so deeply wound up in it was really motivating at the time, and that's the
Mm,
allure of a strong
mm,
identity, is that it is motivating. It helps you, build personal capital. It helps you work hard. It helps you, and that's the problem with identity, is that it's so easy. It is so
mm,
useful, and you can use it to a good advantage, which is what I did over those periods.
yeah.
The problem with it is that it can also use you. So your identity can take over you, and if you're not the one that's controlling when you're going to leave somewhere, which most of us don't have complete control over, that a layoff can happen at any stage, that
Yes.
becomes really, really hard, because you can have your identity ripped away before you're ready to
Mm,
hand it off to somebody else.
mm,
Um, and for my the most recent book, which is called Work Backwards, which came out a year or so ago, 2 years ago, I really went into some of the ways and practices in how I figured out, and how I recommend that anyone
mm,
starts looking at their own identity and figuring out how to make a bit more sense of it. There's a really simple acronym I use in there called a MAP, which stands for meaning, anchors, and priorities. And
yeah.
that's the 3 things that you need to understand about yourself that supersede identity, supersede your kind of like work title, because that's actually, if you know what meaning you get from work and outside it, if you know what your anchors or your personal values are, and if you know the order of your priorities, how you want to spend your time, that is way more important than
Mm,
any job title's ever going to be. And that is the thing that you can really hold on to when the world changes all around you, if you know some of those 3 things.
mm. I love a good acronym. MAP is a powerful one. I hear in that also, I think a lot of the time we use the label of a work identity as a substitute for what guides our priorities or what is meaningful to us, rather than doing the deep excavation, that internal reflection, building our awareness of what those elements are in isolation. Similar to, I hear all of the time, what do I need to make this work? I need more time, or I need more money. It's like, well, okay, they're stand-ins for something. If you had more time, what meaning would you get from that? What purpose would you get from that? What would you prioritize to put it? It's a stand-in for something. And maps feels like a really nice way to structure some of that personal reflection. You
Yeah,
mentioned, sorry.
sorry, I was just going to say, I think this whole discussion around AI is
Mm,
really bringing some of these to the forefront, because all of a sudden we do have more time. So
yeah.
we can do a report that would have taken 4 hours to do in 4 minutes.
Mhm.
And the question then is like, what are we choosing to do with the rest of that 3 hours 55? Are we
Yes.
just going to do more work, so that all of a sudden, instead of doing 1 report a day, we're going to do 17 reports a day? Or are we going to use that and be a bit more intentional with that
Mm,
extra time? And that comes down to the map. What are your meaning? What's your anchors? And what are your priorities?
yes. Particularly for very busy, achievement-oriented people who have outsourced their sense of satisfaction and fulfillment unintentionally to gold stars, to accolades from other people, it can feel very confronting to sit still and do nothing. I was talking to someone the other week, and they were talking about that 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. window where they could downshift and read a book or something. However, they're doing laundry, they're revisiting their inbox, like they're keeping busy. And sometimes potentially that is about the lack of conscious awareness of what we would rather be doing. Maybe.
Yeah, a great point.
There's a question in the chat from Jenny who's talking about outplacement, and that's part of the work that she's been doing in her career and the loss of identity that comes with that. She has made an observation that has been more confronting for her male clients. Not that women don't experience that too, but perhaps it hit them hardest. Do you see a gender differential?
I mean, I think there's gender differentials in almost everything because of the way that society has raised people, the way the society perceives people, the benefits provided to different genders. I think on a broad sense, traditionally, the genders do have differences in this. So yeah, I would say that. I haven't seen any specific research on it, but I certainly would agree with the anecdotal research that says that there would be a difference.
Yes.
However,
maybe it's a singular leg to the stool for men when it comes to work. Maybe there's a few more legs to the stool for women. I don't know. I'm drawing a long bow here, I think.
Yeah. I'm sure there is a bunch of research that shows the difference in it. Interestingly, outplacement and the either success or failure of that is a fascinating topic as well, because when people are laid off or made redundant, the ability to process that emotionally and then actively move to the next stage of what that looks like is really different for everybody. And that depends on your personal situation, depends on your mental health situation, your financial situation, where you are in your career, what your industry looks like. So it's a really personal outcome.
I would 100% agree with that. And I love the call out around how emotionally processing that shift almost first and foremost. Like, yes, we can sort of do that in parallel with some of the other more constructive, action-oriented things that we might be needing to be doing, but it absolutely needs to happen. We can't just rush into the next thing, even though we feel like that is the answer. There's so much opportunity, I think, in that moment to choose again if we are comfortable and we feel safe enough.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest leadership lessons that I have learned of work over the last 15 or 20 years is the need and the ability and the right and the privilege to process things emotionally before moving to the next stage. And sometimes, and I have been guilty of this in the past, of kind of either rushing straight to the next stage, straight to action, straight to what the next steps are, instead of allowing myself the space to kind of like process emotions and feel terrible and be stressed and all those things that are kind of like natural reactions to some of the things that happen around us. All of that is completely natural. And all of us take different amounts of times to process it as well. And so I think understanding how long it takes you to process. Some of us process things quite quickly and move on. I generally process things at a relatively good rate for me, and then I can move into action. But other people take longer to do that. And I know that's something in all relationships in my life. I'm constantly kind of understanding that and making sure I give people enough space to be able to process it before we move to the next stage, if we even get there.
What a beautiful thing to be aware of in yourself, and then also being able to kind of understand how other people are different. So powerful in relationships. I will never forget when somebody shared the phrase with me, feelings are for feeling. And it's like, of course they are. How often do we kind of like go, oh, I can't shed a tear in this meeting, or I'm feeling really anxious and I need to put a lid on it. Like we just keep pushing it down because we're anchored into, I need the bottom of the inbox. I need to get to the next meeting. Like we're rushing without necessarily appreciating what value we're trying to create, or, what will drive a sense of fulfillment or pride at the end of the day, the week, or the year.
Totally. And there's a lot of gendered considerations taken to that as well, on expectations of what different genders should do, shouldn't do. And that makes things even harder to process these feelings, because feelings don't care if we're male or we're female. We still feel the same things, but often the expected reaction to us, or the expected what is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, or who is more likely to do X or Y, comes into it.
Yeah. So, someone, Warren, in the chat has just suggested that maybe we've got an identity outside of work too. Yes.
Warren,
Although I think many people have been pruning those outside of work identities to be more singularly focused than perhaps we have in the past.
A great call out, Warren. When I talk about meaning in my MAP acronym, there's two parts to meaning. And what is what meaning you get from work, and the second part is what meaning you get outside work. And understanding the two of those things is really important, because if you get all your meaning from work, great, you might have a great fulfilling job for a while, but that's not going to last forever. And same if you get all of your meaning from outside work, you're going to find work a real punish. So understanding what meaning you get from both of those is just fascinating and really important, and a great call out.
We are, in fact, well-rounded humans, as opposed to robots designed just to do a job. Who would have thought? As much as, the old production line kind of view of work has us kind of shoehorned into a way of operating that does suggest we are, steps on a production line. You mentioned so much is shifting in the world of work at the moment, AI being one of those, as the increasing weight and consideration, quite rightly, given to psychosocial risks and hazards and our well-being and work, among others. I feel like there's an opportunity here for us to recraft the way that we relate to work individually and collectively. When you think about the opportunity that presents, what do you think is a very tactical, tangible next right step that somebody can take to explore that evolution? Because it feels very big and esoteric in a lot of ways.
It is big. It's fascinating that when I wrote Work Backwards, a lot of that was a reaction to the COVID years and to the upheaval of work that happened throughout the 2 or 3 year period that we're still feeling now. So everything from hybrid work, everything from digital delivery, everything from just all of the fast forwarding of things that happened. And I thought that was going to be, innocently thought that was going to be, the big work change that we're going to have to deal with. And then AI and all of its impacts. And we're just at the very start of this, as obviously now upending work in a new way on top of all of those changes. And that is quite rightly for all of us hard, and it's unsettling and it's messy, and we're all figuring this out together at the same time. So the simplest thing that I often tell people is to not worry too much if you feel these feelings at the moment of uncertainty and fear and apprehension, because every single person is also going through this at the same time. No one is an expert in this technology. None of us have, we're all figuring this out in real time at the same time. And as soon as you make that mental switch from it being something that is fearful and something that's apprehensive to something that we're all figuring this out, and I'm going to experiment with this, and I'm going to make mistakes, then it just changes your mindset. And that's how I really think. I often say the future of work is 3 things. It is personal, because it's very different, you and me. It is messy, because we're all going through it at the same time. And it's here right now. It is the future of work. We've kind of talked about it, and not much changed in the way of work over decades. And now decades have changed in the last couple of years. And it's okay to feel all those feelings at the same time.
Feelings are for feeling.
They are for feeling. We're all feeling them.
I look around so many people, and like the organizations, teams, clients that I work with, and just people that I know, and it's like we've taken the snow globe and we've shaken it up, but we haven't put it back on the mantelpiece yet. We're just like every 5 minutes we're picking it up and we're shaking it again. And we're trying to figure out what on earth is going on inside that globe, which is Like, it's hard, right?
And I don't know if we're ever going to put it back on the same shelf. I actually think we had
I
a
hope
period
not.
of relative stability in workplaces from the 70s to the 2010s. It was relatively stable. Not
Mm,
much changed. Things just got a little bit bigger and a little bit faster. And yes, the
yeah.
internet came along and we stopped faxing each other. But not much change to how we work, where we work, and basically why we work. Yet in the
Mm,
past 7 years, how we work, where we work, and why we work have all changed dramatically. And I don't think we're ever, to continue your analogy, you're going to put that snow globe back on the shelf again. I think we're going to keep shaking it, and AI is going to keep shaking whatever foundations that we thought. But we're all going through this together, and let's enjoy the positives and let's try and nullify or try to temper down some of the negatives.
yes. It's that eye for opportunity, right? Which is hard, even if we just think about the way that our brain works. If all of this is changing, if we're lost in the snowstorm that is this shaken snow globe, and we can't see our way forward, all of that creates this, threat response in us. So of course we see black and white. Of course we see problems, not solutions. Of course we kind of end up in this very fixed state, don't want to make choices, don't want to make decisions, can't see the long term, very short term are anchored. But that doesn't mean that we can't get to seeing the opportunity, to seeing the reward, which is where we can be more collaborative, we can be more innovative, we're comfortable experimenting and playing in the way that we relate to work. And I think
Completely.
recognizing the impermanence of any of that can be really empowering because, we
Yeah,
can't really ruin it if it's impermanent. Every moment you get a chance to choose again.
100%. I'm more excited now about the future of work and where this is heading than I have been. And I'm an optimist. It
Yeah,
says that in my LinkedIn introduction. It says I'm an optimist who
yeah.
loves thinking about big ideas. That is my identity that no one can take away from me. And I think so. I just think of the last couple of years. So my husband and I, we moved to Spain, to Mallorca, for the
Mm,
last few years, and worked and lived from there. And I commuted back to Australia when I had to. I did most of my calls and conversations and work through Zoom or through WhatsApp,
yeah.
and none of that would have been possible in the past.
Mhm.
So kind of pre 2020, that would almost have been impossible. So that I'm thankful for, and then the fact that all of this technology is changing. Um, I do have, and I'm writing I write a weekly column in the Sydney Morning Herald of the Age, and I'm writing my weekly column this week on
Yeah.
AI. Obviously, AI kind of comes up about once a month in these topics. You can't not talk about it,
Yeah.
but basically around the use of AI. And I try not to be a brake on things, but when things are moving so fast, I think it is important just to have a voice of reason in your ear that just always asks, just because I can do this with AI, should I do it with AI? And that is a really interesting question for leaders to ask around, rather than outsourcing everything over there because you can, should you be doing it? And I'm talking, in fact, about what happens when you receive AI slop or work slop from a colleague. There's a
Mm.
bunch of research that comes out that says that you feel that they are less competent and you feel worse about them. And I think that's fascinating. I think we should all be aware of it as we are creating more and more content using AI. What impact does that have when we send it off to somebody?
Yes. I I love that, and I'm very much looking forward to reading how that comes together on on the weekend. I did some quick math last week, I think, off the back of a conversation. There's a lot of people who I think are most challenged by how work is shifting and changing have established careers. Like they might be midlife, mid-career. I took 45 as an age, did a bit of research. What's the average retirement age? Picked 63 because maybe we'll trail off into some semi-retired part-time working from there. And if you are 45 today, retiring at 63 in the future, you show up to work 4,320 more times between now and then, right? Uh, And I talk with so many people who are like, I've climbed this career Everest and it feels a bit meh, but I guess this is it, right? It's fine. Who wants to live fine for 4,320 more work days?
Amen.
It's wild when we can actually choose something that is vibrant and fulfilling and evolving. I think is perhaps the other thing that Gen Xers could wrap their minds around, right? It's not one ladder, it's something that we get to evolve with.
Yeah, I can't imagine the idea of kind of counting down until retirement day. And I know that is a reality for many people. But if you can find some kind of meaning within your job, work should be a way of learning, connecting with other people, obviously earning income, all these things that you can and should do for as long as you want to. Not so almost like choose when you want to leave rather than kind of have to leave on a certain date because a paycheck is coming. It's fascinating that when we talk about meaning at work, it's something that I think about a lot because it is a really hard question for most people to answer. And there was a really fascinating study that I looked at for Work Backwards, which looked at doctors in the UK. And it looked at a particular hospital and looked at their level of burnout of doctors. And they asked them to measure which parts of their job they got meaning from and how long they spent doing those areas. And what they found was the doctors that spent about 20% of their time on tasks which they found meaningful had the lowest levels of burnout. So less than 20%, you started to have high burnout. 20%, you had low levels of burnout. And once they got over 20%, the level of burnout stayed about the same. So what it showed, and this is a fascinating study, which basically shows that you don't need to find everything, every aspect of your job enjoyable and meaningful. As long as about a fifth of it is meaningful for you, you can
One day a week
with the rest of it and still get the positive benefits. And I think about that all the time when I'm doing invoicing or doing something that I do not enjoy yet is a part of my job. But as long as at least 20% of it, at least a day a week is kind of like quite meaningful and you really enjoy, that gives you enough. And I think that's really important when we talk about meaning at work. It doesn't need to be like every day has this like, God-given meaning comes down from heaven.
It feels much more realistic and achievable and doable when we say one day a week or 20%.
Yeah, a lot more achievable. All of a sudden, that I think you see that and you say, I can do that. I can craft my job using even a tool called job crafting, which is figuring out which parts of your job give you meaning. Do more of that and do less of the parts that don't. If you can figure out how to just dial up those parts that give you meaning, and that can be through a task that you do, it can be through a relationship that you have, it can be about how you think about your job, whatever it is, there's different ways that you can dial it up. And that is something that's really achievable that I think anyone can take away, as opposed to thinking, I need to find a job that's going to fulfill me for every hour of every day, which is basically impossible.
That does feel very unrealistic, right? Yeah. And maybe it's not your paid job. Maybe it's, 20% of your time that you're volunteering or it's a community piece. I think Warren mentioned identity outside of work. We can find that meaning in something that might not be paid employment, perhaps as well, depending on your circumstances.
Yeah, I think the best one is people that you work with. So can you find someone that you work with that you consider a friend and enjoy working with them? Then it doesn't matter if you are doing something that you really dislike. If you're doing it with someone next to you that's kind of you quite enjoy the company, you talk, you get to have lunch together, you get to do all the fun things and get the benefits of having a friendship at work. That can make a huge difference.
Yes. And I think you wrote recently about the loneliness epidemic at work, if I am correct.
Yes.
And to me, that links with, it's almost like we've had this breakdown at a community level, like some of the structures that used to pull us together and give us shared values or some rhythm and ritual, like religion, just as an example, going to temple or synagogue or church on whatever day of the week, and that's where we met people, and that's where we had certain conversations, and how we hooked into our community and showed up in alignment with our values. That doesn't exist as much for all of us anymore, and we've been looking for somewhere else to put that attention. And it seems like a lot of us are doing that with work. We're making work almost a meaning-making engine, perhaps. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And the decrease in so many areas, like how we interact with other people, how often we go to restaurants, how much dating we're doing. There's all of these mega trends happening at the moment that all point towards this loneliness epidemic. And one of them that contributes to it is the workplace. And speaking of ritual, up until 2020, almost all of us had a daily ritual from Monday to Friday of what we would do. And you mightn't have thought of it as a ritual, but even just going to that same coffee place, even saying hello to Jenny as you walk past her every single morning, even sitting there and making a coffee at 11 o'clock, all of that was ritual. And that was really important. Since 2020, and there's been various people going back to the office 5 days a week, some in 4 days a week, some 3 days, some not at all, there has been a change to that. And I'm the biggest proponent of working from home. I think it has so many positives, but we need to also talk about the negatives. And one of the negatives of that is that we are increasingly becoming more lonely. We're having more relationships that happen only over Teams chat. We are not reading the room and reading people's body language as much as possible when we're doing things through video conference.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, when I published that story 2 weeks ago, I had a big reaction to it. I had dozens of messages from people saying, thanks for talking about this. We need to talk about it. Or how can we solve it? It's a really hard question. 2 very quick ways of trying to deal with this is, one, I think it's important for both the worker and the workplace to deal with this. You can't do it alone. So from the worker, is when you go into the office, what are you doing when you're in the office versus what are you doing at home? Because they should be very different things. So if you are only in an office 3 days a week, you should not be sitting there and just going in and sitting at your desk and typing out your emails and then going back home. Do that at home. That's perfect for home. But when you're in the office, have that meeting, have creative collaborations, get everyone together, go out for lunches, do all those things that are really important, because you can mitigate some of the problems with it if you are really intentional about what you're doing. The second one for workplaces is you should also be rethinking how you are setting your workplace up. So not only physically in terms of desks and collaborative spaces, but also, are you actually giving budget to people to be able to go and have lunches when they come together? Are you, what are you doing to set up good meeting room places? What are you doing to make sure that people come in on the similar days? Because if everyone works 3 days a week, but everyone can choose whatever day they want, you're then never going to have some consensus, because people come into the office on a Friday and a Monday when there's no one there, and you might see someone 1 day a week.
I hear that a lot. It's like I show up and maybe I like the quiet time because nobody else is here, but also nobody else is here. So why am I here? So that intentionality, I think, has so much potency. Do your nudging, walk the floor, say hi, follow up with people, and sprinkle little reminders or just a little bit of energy. Do those tasks that you need people physically together for. I think that's a really important reminder. That intentionality requires some cognitive load, though, I think, and it's almost like a lot of us have fallen into these rhythms and routines where we're doing what our brain does, we're saving brain calories, and we're not intentionally thinking about it. Whereas perhaps there's an opportunity to get clear on what that new rhythm might be, so we're not deciding every Monday, every Tuesday, every Wednesday what we might be giving our attention to. But we've very specifically crafted a new structure and rhythm that supports us in the best way possible.
I think intentionality is so important. I think that's what really, we've had a couple of years of it now. So we should have started to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And if you haven't, you're probably not listening enough. So look around and figure out what works for your workplace. Be really intentional with it. And my favorite word in the workplace is experiments. I think giving someone the experiment all of a sudden means it can fail, and that's okay. It means you have a limited time period to do it. So let's do an experiment for 3 months. And it means that you, by its very definition, should choose what you're measuring and how you're going to judge success. So I always tell people to go to your manager, and if there's something that you want, if you want to try a 4-day work week, if you want to try a 9-day fortnight, if you want to try working from home 1 day a week, go to your manager and say, prepare yourself, go there and say, I would like to run an experiment because here's what I think might happen. I have a feeling that if we test this thing out, I'd like to try it for 3 months. This is what we're going to test. We're going to test A, if people come in more or less, B, what their happiness satisfaction's like, C, what the turnover's like, whatever you want to test. D, what the productivity is like, what the outcome is, what the sales figures are like, whatever it is, set up an experiment. And most managers, they might say no, but they would at least consider it and at least I think have to give you a good reason as to why they think it's not going to work. And if you set up a genuine experiment, you can almost test out anything in the workplace. You can test out any of these tools.
That experiment lens. And look, I spent 25 years as a registered psychologist. There's a particular bent that I've been trained in and committed to for a while. That experiment lens really resonates with me, and I think it's so valuable because, again, it's impermanent. We're not saying I'm right and you're wrong. We're lowering the stakes. We're trying it on for size, which is another way of seeing things that I think can be really powerful for people. Is like maybe the way that you introduce yourself, the label that you use to explain your work, maybe the way that you hold a particular meeting, you open it, you take the minutes, maybe the way you use AI this week. We're just trying something different on. We're in the change room. We haven't bought anything yet. We're not putting down cold hard cash. We're just playing and experimenting. And with that new data, that new information, we get to make much more informed choices.
Yeah, I love experiments. I think everyone should do more of them. It's how we're going to test and learn whether we like doing things. And it also means there's absolutely no face lost. If you get to the end of 3 months and you've done something and you realize that you do or you don't like it, like it's not for everyone. Like all of these tools that we have, which is 4-day work weeks and 9-day fortnights and working from home and using AI to do stuff. All of these things are tools. We do not have to do them. There's no one size fits all. You should not feel this pressure to have to change everything. And I think AI is a really great example of that. I think there can be pressure. I feel pressure of like everything needs to move to AI now. What are you doing that by hand? And I'm one person, and then there's lots of other people out there just kind of fighting back some things that I really enjoy doing. A perfect example of this is I do a lot of interviews for my books and for my columns, and I record them, and most of them I get transcribed. So I'll send them off to send them off. I get them automatically transcribed, and some of them I don't. So if I do a really big, interesting interview or someone that I just really admire, I will not send it off to be transcribed, and I will stop and absorb, and it might take me an hour or two, and I'll listen to it and I'll handwrite every quote out. And it's because that thinking time really allows it time to settle. And that, I think, is really important in this world of AI where everything can be done instantly. If a report comes out, should you just get AI to summarize it automatically and give you the bullet points? Occasionally, yes. But if you really want to understand something, put 2 hours in your diary, sit down and read it from front to back. I think that's really, really important.
I saw something recently where a very articulate, intelligent lady was talking about losing touch with the purpose that a particular piece of work has. And a report is a great example, right? If we think the purpose is to generate a report and send it to somebody, then maybe AI is the way to go. If we think that the purpose of that particular piece of work is to build understanding, is to pressure test an idea, is to expand our frame of reference, is to gain an insight into a particular stakeholder, is to build our mental model of something, then we approach that task differently. But we need to know what we're solving for. We need to know what the point of the thing is.
Yeah, that's very, very true. I have a new rule that's formulating in my head at the moment, which is if someone expects me to spend time reading something, I expect them to have spent time creating it. And it's
I like that.
really interesting because I love reading people's reports that they've written. I love looking at PowerPoint presentations that someone has thought about. I love watching videos that someone has made. But I expect you to have thought, you as a human who's created this, to have really thought about that. And I think that's the reason why things like AI written books, I don't think are ever going to properly take off, because I don't
Such
think
an
we
interesting idea.
as humans want to consume something that's been entirely written by computers, unless it's been really clear we're trying to get an insight into how an LLM works. Great, I'll read that. But when someone sends me, and this has happened recently, like a 40-page report, and you open it up and you know from the first line that it's been written by AI, I do not want to read it. Why should I spend an hour reading that when you've spent a minute creating that? Because I
Ask
want
your AI to summarize and read it too.
Yeah. I mean, that's the ultimate irony, isn't it? If someone writes
Right.
3 bullet points in, creates a 40-page report, you get the 40-page report, ask AI to summarize it, and you get 3 bullet points back. It's like, just send me the bullet points in the first place.
Nobody understands anything. Communication hasn't happened effectively,
I think
I would argue.
it's just something I think a lot and deeply about, because communication is leadership. Communication is relationships. My book on conflict, communication is conflict. And communication is one thing that sets us apart as a human species. We have figured out really deep ways of communicating with each other. And if we start shortcutting that too much, and technology is really pushing us at the moment, you open up Gmail and that gives you, whether you like it or not, gives you the prompt at the bottom. It basically tells you this is what you should write in your response back. If we outsource that, we're at the early stages of it. So at the moment, I don't think it has much of an impact, because I'm mid-career. I have a long way to go, and I've spent 20 plus years getting to this point of figuring it out. But if I'm 20 and I never learned those skills in the first place, and AI writes all of my emails for me and does my essays at university for me, and maybe even at school kind of does the writing for me, I will never learn how to do it. And that is going to be the biggest thing that we need to keep our eye on, is it's not going to affect you and me and most of the people watching this on LinkedIn. It's going to affect the new graduates and people coming through now who, unless we do something about it, will never learn some of these really critical skills like judgment and empathy. And I know that'd be dramatic. I'm obviously going to learn empathy, but it's just, you do learn empathy by communicating. You learn how to conflict.
Maybe not. And I think this is a beautiful point to perhaps bring the conversation into land around, you're talking about the human skills that, from what I hear, and I would agree, are going to be the differentiators and the things that really matter in the future of work. How can we connect to other people? Our ability to build trust, our capacity to think critically, our ability to be creative and innovate in work, but also in our life. And ideally, AI would create some space so we get that 20% of time that we can dedicate to something really meaning making for us. Like, that would be a beautiful use case, perhaps.
Yeah.
But it's leaning into our humanity and our connection that may ultimately be the answer.
I 100% agree. I think the great irony of artificial intelligence is that it's going to show the importance of human intelligence. And it's really showing us how important these skills are that have been easily dismissed in a workplace: leadership, creativity, conflict management, empathy, all of these things that I think we thought were soft skills. I think we thought were human resources skills. I think we thought were not important. These are skills that cannot be replicated. Sure, we can be told by AI, this is what you should say. We can be fooled into thinking they can be replicated by send off this email if you want to negotiate with this person like this. But when you take away that facade, that emotional intelligence of how you read the room, how you look someone in the eye and say, I like you, but I disagree vehemently with what you say, how you conflict with somebody in a healthy way that helps you come to a better solution. All these things are so more important. They've always been important, but I think AI is showing us how important they are. And I think if there's any skills that we should be leaning into and learning more over the coming years, it's all of these skills that are the human skills. And that really excites me because I think that's where what humans do best. And I think we've gotten a little bit bad at some of these skills. And if I was looking at what I wanted to get better at over the next few years, of course, be AI literacy, great, learn how to use AI. All of us can do that. All of us should be doing that. But learn how to get better at conflict, learn how to have better conversations, learn how to listen better, learn how to come up with better ideas. All these things are so much more important.
Love that. And I hear as a necessary precursor to that, we need self-awareness in terms of what meaning means for us, what our purpose in life is, what role we want work to play in our life. And we need the intentionality to run some experiments, to make some choices that perhaps were different to what we were doing in the past, so we can find a way forward rather than perhaps standing still and waiting for the instant clarity about, the beginning to end roadmap to land, because it's not.
That's
And
not
no
coming.
one has it.
There's no clarity coming. You 100% nailed it there. Like we're all figuring this out together, and I love the messiness of that. I love the confusion. I love. I think anyone who tells you, my favorite thing at the moment is AI experts. None of us are experts.
Oh, yes.
In this. It's been around for half a minute, and we're all figuring it out at the same time. We're all experimenting, and I love this is not a dig at anyone who considers themselves an expert, but keep learning and getting better at it because we're all just figuring this out at the same time.
What a beautiful thing. We're all beginners together. I think there's something in that
how
too.
wonderful.
Yeah. Tim, before we close this out, any final thoughts that you would like to share?
I think the final thought is, I often think when we talk about leadership and when we talk about some of these kind of bigger topics like leading at the edge and stuff, we tend to forget that the human side of all of this, and I think that's been a theme that's come up in this, is probably the most important aspect of this. Every CEO is just a human trying to figure it out, and they might look on the surface like they are ruthless or harsh or sometimes even robotic or delivering
Cold
something
and distant.
cold, all those things. And yet underneath all of that, we're all the same. We're all humans trying to figure this out. Every single leader, even the ones we look up to and admire and put on pedestals, from Tim Cook to Elon Musk, every single one of them is just as human and fallible and trying to figure this out and has the same fears, hopes, concerns as all of us. And that's such a freeing thought to me because I realize that all of us are figuring this out at the same time. That's my final message.
So freeing. And I think there's so much permission in that. Funny side note, I was once asked by a very firm, status-oriented guy what I'd learned about boards in my career. And I said basically that, you know what, I've learned they are just human beings. They have very big remits, important jobs, broad scopes, but like they're humans.
Yeah.
The look of shock and disgust on his face
Wow.
was so surprising. And I was like, thank you. You are not someone I want to work with. It was so telling. Thank you so much.
Wow.
And
Because and what do you think was behind that? Because he thought that there was a facade that he was trying to keep up that you had seen through?
Maybe. I think he was American as well. And look, my husband's American. I feel like I can say that. There's a particular status hierarchy that plays out there. I think maybe he thought it was disrespectful, which is not how I meant it.
I think the more time you spend the higher you go up in your career, and the more time you spend inside boardrooms of people, you can still have a lot of respect for people, and there's no disrespect meant, but you do realize that everyone is doing their best with what they have, the information they have, and as long as someone has the right intention behind it, they might get it wrong, they might deliver things wrong. You see that often with leaders and CEOs who might be clumsy at what they say, or they might deliver news of redundancy in a terrible way. There's always an intention behind what they are trying to do, and you have to assume that it is a good intention. And that's, I'm an optimist, so I do assume there's a good intention behind there. That might be a little bit optimistic of me to say, but I think it's a nice way that I do assume that people have the best of intentions.
I think that's a beautiful assumption to walk through the world with, and it is one that I share. Such a broad-ranging conversation, Tim. Thank you so much for diving into that with me. If there are any other questions from people who are watching this, you can drop this into the comments, and we'll keep an eye on those. Maybe for the next day or so, if that's okay. I think you've just painted a really beautiful picture of a moment in time where so much is up for grabs in the way that we relate to work. And we can do that individually, we can do that as leaders, we can do that as workplaces. But we need to see it as the opportunity that it is. And we need to see it as permission to run some experiments, almost an invitation. And the more we lean into that, perhaps the more successful, and more importantly, the more fulfilled we will be.
100%.
Cool. Thank you so much, Tim. And for those of you who have joined us, really appreciate you being here. Have a beautiful rest of the day.